الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hope everyone is well. Jazakumullah khairan for joining our workshop, The Fiqh of Zakat. This training is presented by Khayr Academy. Khayr Academy is an online institute who run free trainings and workshops and affordable courses for adults and children. More information, you can email info@khayracademy.com. That's info@khayracademy.com. Inshallah, this workshop will be recorded and uploaded on our YouTube channel, so you can view this workshop later. We do advise students to make notes, inshallah, and to try to stay on for the entire workshop. It is better to attend the workshop live than watching the recording. However, if you do need to leave, then there will be a recording available on our YouTube channel, inshallah. Our instructor for today's workshop is Sheikh Bilal Arif. Sheikh completed his alimiyyah in Darul Uloom Bury, where he studied under many reputable scholars such as Hadhrat Sheikh Yusuf Motala, rahimahullah, Shaykh Hashim, Sheikh Bilal Bawa, Mufti Shabbir Sb, and many other scholars. Thereafter, he has been serving his community in Glasgow for almost a decade. Sheikh also completed his Iftaa in Jamia Ashrafiyyah in Pakistan under Mufti Muhammad Asad Khan Sahib. We are fortunate to have Sheikh with us today. He has taken time out of his busy schedule. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept his efforts, bless him and his family, and take him from strength to strength. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Before I pass you over to Sheikh, I would like to mention that we will have a Q&A session towards the end. So do leave your questions for the end of this workshop, roughly I would say in an hour or so. And we will also have a small short break in between, halfway through the workshop, so within an hour. So do keep your questions for the Q&A session, inshallah. The chat option will be open. Without further ado, I will pass you over to Sheikh, inshallah.
Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala sayyidil anbiya'i wal mursaleen, wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in, wa man tabi'ahum bi ihsan ila yawmid din, amma ba'd. Subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. My dear respected brothers and sisters, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I pray you're all well. I would like to start off by thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for firstly giving me the opportunity and the tawfiq to be part of this. I do feel extremely honored. I would also like to thank Khayr Academy, especially Mona Junaid Saib, for reaching out to me and allowing me to be part of this as well and present this. Jazakallah khairan to everyone who is participating live and those who would listen afterwards as well. Without any further delay, inshallah, we will begin the course. As everyone knows, this course is in regards to the fiqh of zakat. We won't be going too much into the Quranic ayat and the hadith, the virtues, the benefits of zakat. We will be mainly focusing on the fiqh. And the aim, inshallah, is that by the end of the course, the giving zakat and the obligations, the rulings regarding zakat will be much clearer, inshallah. And that hopefully those who have not paid their zakat and are not that well aware of it will be well equipped, and they can then start making plans and start making arrangements of how to calculate their zakat as well. So Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Now, first and foremost, one of the key things to start off with is what is zakat, and just to go into this very briefly. One of the first interactions that many of us would have had with zakat is when we were children studying in our local makatib or going to the masjid, and we learned that zakat is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. So it holds a fundamental position in our deen. It is also an obligation upon Muslims. As we'll discuss in the following slides, those who fulfill certain conditions, zakat will be obligatory upon them. The literal meaning of zakat means to purify. And from here we understand that, and we get this concept, which is also mentioned in some narration, that zakat, when we give zakat, it is a form of purification of our wealth. And it's like the dirt and the filth of our wealth that we're removing to purify the rest of it. So it's not just a form of charity or a form of obligation that we're giving. There's a much deeper meaning to that as well. And the definition of zakat, and we'll be breaking this definition down throughout the course, it is the transfer of ownership of a certain amount of wealth that has been prescribed by the Sharia from a rich Muslim to a poor Muslim who is not a Hashmi and neither the slave of a Hashmi, for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's some key points in here, inshallah. I'll just highlight now, but we'll be discussing later on. This is the point of the transfer of ownership. Many people's questions will be solved just by understanding this point, the transfer of ownership. Also of a certain amount of wealth. The Sharia has specified how much do we need to give. Also, it's from a rich Muslim, and we're going to discuss what is a rich Muslim, and it needs to be given to a poor Muslim. And there's some points of who you cannot give it to. It cannot be a Hashimi or the slave of a Hashimi. And ultimately, it is for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, upon whom is zakat fardh? Zakat is fardh on number one, the first condition is a Muslim. So from here, we understand that if someone is a non-Muslim will not have to pay zakat. And also there's no specification of gender. So men also need to pay zakat and women also need to pay zakat. Everyone will be responsible for their own zakat. Number two, the second condition is to be an adult. Now, when we talk about adult, many of us don't truly understand, or when we think of it, we don't really think of it properly in the right manner. When we think of adult, we usually just think, okay, someone who is 18, 19, 20. But here, when we say an adult, we're talking about an adult in the Sharia. And an adult in the Sharia is someone who is mature, someone who has become baligh, they have reached the age of maturity, the age of puberty. And this can be someone at the age of 15, even 16, even someone who's younger than that. And just a point to understand, and just a point to hint at, is this is where a lot of, especially parents, when they're teaching their children, they don't actually bring up zakat because they think zakat is something that will come much later in life. Rather, there are many who may, zakat might be obligatory upon them even below the age of 20, 18, even below that. So very important to understand that an adult can be, we're looking at the Islamic perspective, someone who has become baligh, someone mature, and this could be even someone in their early teens, even mid-teens as well. The third condition is a sane person. If someone is not sane, if someone doesn't have control over their faculties, they're not really understanding right and wrong, they can't differentiate between right and wrong, they're not sound of mind, then many of the rulings of Sharia don't apply to them. So similarly with zakat, the third condition is someone needs to be sound of mind. The fourth condition, which you may notice that in many other places this condition is not mentioned, and the reason being is because in today's day and age we don't really find this condition to be not present. This condition really is applicable to everyone, is to be a free person. And the opposite of that is being a slave, which in today's day and age is not really applicable. And the fifth condition, and which has maybe the most confusion, is someone who owns the Nisaab. So if someone fulfills these 5 conditions, zakat will be obligatory upon them. And we're going to go into more detail in the fifth condition. What does this mean? So someone who owns the Nisaab, first of all, what does the word Nisaab mean? Nisaab simply means, it refers to a threshold, a limit of wealth. That if someone possesses this amount of wealth, then they have, if they have wealth that equals to that amount or more than that amount, then they will be known as this person has the Nisaab, they possess the Nisaab. Now, one of the questions that people ask is, okay, what wealth are we going to count? Do we count all of our wealth? What about the things that I have lying around at home? I've got, extra clothing at home. I've got, some people have more than one car. Do we have to add that up as well? So when we're looking at wealth that reaches the Nisaab, or to determine whether you own the Nisaab, we're going to look at the following 4 points. That what does the wealth that we're going to look at? Number one, it should be fully owned. That you should completely own this wealth. What does that mean is that you're not taking care of someone else's wealth. You don't have wealth that just in safekeeping by you, but it belongs to someone else. We're not looking at that wealth. We're looking at wealth that you completely own. It's your belonging. You can spend it as you want, and it belongs to you, solely to you. The second point is that we're looking at wealth that's in excess of your personal needs. So this now takes away everything that's within your house or within your ownership that you purchase for personal usage. So if you have clothing, if you have furniture at home, even the house that you live in, or if you've purchased a house that you're not living in at the moment, but you bought it for, or you purchased it for personal use maybe in the future, on that house there will not be zakat. There will not be zakat on those. We're not looking at those items at the moment. We're not counting those items. Also, if someone has cars, even if they have multiple cars, we will not count that towards what we're looking at, if the wealth that we're looking at, if you're to see if you reach the Nisaab or not. Many people ask this question, and I've had this asked before, that I've got like 2 or 3 cars. In a family, sometimes there's multiple cars, but I don't really use one. Or I've got a lot of old clothing. A majority of us have things in our own household that we bought them at one time to use, but they've just been lying on the shelf. We do not count any of that, because although you might not be using it, it was purchased for personal use. So that is all it says. So we're not looking at any of that at all. The third point, and this is the wealth, this is the main point of what wealth are we actually going to count. It is wealth of a productive nature. And we're going to come, inshallah, in the following slides of a list of things that we will actually count. But an example of this is cash. So any form of cash you have, regardless of what country it is of, all cash, you will count that, whether it's cash in the bank, cash in your house. Gold and silver will also be counted. If you have business merchandise, we will also be discussing pensions as well. Shares is something that will also count as well. There's also livestock, and there's a few more things that we'll discuss later on. Also, just a point to note that when it comes to livestock, animals and even crops, etc., we're not going to be discussing that in this presentation, simply because many people, it won't be applicable to them. If anyone does have these things that they need to take into account, then you can ask a local scholar, inshallah. You can ask later on, and if you have time, maybe I could send something to those people that require that information, inshallah. So the third point is we're looking at wealth of a productive nature, namely the things that I've mentioned. And the fourth point is the wealth that you have. Once you have this wealth that reaches the Nisaab, you should have possessed it for a complete lunar year. The Islamic year, you should have it for a complete lunar year. And then once you fulfill these 4 conditions, or these 5 conditions, sorry, the ones that are at the above, then a person like this, zakat will be obligatory upon them. They are now someone upon whom zakat is fardh. And we're going to go into, inshallah, a few of these points in more detail. Now, note to bear in mind, I've already mentioned it and explained that a little bit before, but if you have wealth that's excess of your personal needs, so it's not of a productive nature, so it's not like cash, gold, silver, but it's excess of your personal needs. Like many of the things we have in our house today, there's so many things that if you were to actually count the items in your house that you don't use, they're actually excess of our personal need. We don't really need them. We've got plenty of utensils that are lying around. We've got plenty of even furniture that sometimes we may not be using. As long as you purchased it for personal use at one time, or you're gifted it and it was kept for personal use, you will not count that. You would never include that into your zakat assets. Yeah, unless you bought it for trading, you bought it to sell, then that's different. But in general, these items, even if it's excess, even if it's lying around in your house, you won't count that towards your zakatable assets. Now, we mentioned Nisaab in the previous slide. What is the Nisaab? What's this threshold that we're referring to? So at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, he fixed the Nisaab in accordance to gold and silver. So gold was 20 dinars. So if someone had 20 dinars of gold, which is just 20 gold coins, they would have been classed as they have reached the Nisaab. Or if they had 200 dirhams of silver, so 200 silver coins, they would also have been classed as having the silver Nisaab. They would have then be classed as, they own the Nisaab and zakat is obligatory upon them. At the time of the Prophet ﷺ, gold and silver, these 2 amounts were actually exactly equal to each other. So 20 dinar would have been exactly equal to 200 dirhams. But over time, especially in today's day and age, now gold and silver, the prices have, have drastically changed. Gold has gone very expensive. Silver is fairly cheap in today's day and age. So that's why we'll see that there's a bit of a difference between the two. Now, many people, especially in today's day and age, will look at it in terms of grams. So you have gold 20 dinars, 87.48 grams. Many people in the Indian subcontinent or the older generations, they will look at tola. Tola is just a different measurement of weight. So many women at home, they will know that I've got 7 tola of gold, 7.5, 8 tola. They'll know that figure. They might know in grams. Whatever it may be, if anyone has this amount of gold, then they have reached the Nisaab. When it comes to silver, the grams of silver is 612.36 grams or 52.5 tola. So again, if someone has this amount of silver, zakat will be, they will have reached the Nisaab. Now, in today's day and age, this value of the Nisaab is accurate of today. This changes, and many people, majority to be honest, will be going according to the value. Because majority of the people will have mixed assets. We're going to have cash, someone might have gold and silver, someone might have business stock. So therefore, going according to the value of these is much easier. So in today's day and age, the gold value of the Nisaab is £4,231.41. That's as of today. And the silver Nisaab is £367.42. And that's accurate as of today. Again, it will change. And on the day when you're figuring out your zakat anniversary, this is when you will check this. Now, an important question that I'm sure many people are going to ask now is, okay, but which one do we go according to? Like, we've got gold, which is sitting at 4,000 plus, and silver is all the way down at 367. Which Nisaab do we go? Many people won't have £4,000. And a lot of people will have 367. So what the scholars have mentioned is the only time you will look at the gold Nisaab is if you only possess gold. If there's someone who literally, and I would say that this would be maybe very rare to come by, that a person only has gold assets. They have zero cash, they have nothing else, because nearly everyone has some cash lying around, whether it's a couple of pounds lying in the house or in their bank account. But if someone only has gold, and that's the only asset they possess, then they will go according to the gold Nisaab. So if there's, for example, a woman who has gold jewelry, that's literally the only assets they possess. And once they value that gold, it equals to 4,000, it equals to this amount or more than £4,231.41, then they will be classed as Sahibun Nisaab. Now they own the Nisaab, they fulfill that condition. Now, if anyone has mixed assets, so you've got gold and silver, or you have gold and cash, or you have silver and cash, or you have cash and business stock, you have any other mixture of assets, then you'll go according to the silver Nisaab. So to make this very simple, majority of the people are going to go according to the silver Nisaab. Yeah, very rarely you'll have anyone that will go according to the gold Nisaab, especially today. So throughout this course, we'll be referring to the silver Nisaab mainly. Gold Nisaab generally won't be really much in use. So if a person has the silver Nisaab, you can look at your values. So you can look at your assets and look at the value of them. And if you possess this much today, £367.42, or more than that, then you have now reached the Nisaab. And if you fulfill the other conditions that we mentioned in the previous slide, you're an adult, you're a Muslim, you're an adult, a person sane, and they're a free person, and also you've fulfilled the Nisaab, then zakat will be obligatory upon you. Now, where can you find the Nisaab? You can find this in many websites in today's day and age. You can look at wellwishers.org, I've noted that here. You can also look at NZF, National Zakat Foundation. You can look at their website. Even many people can ask the local jewelers as well. They can normally tell you the Nisaab value of today as well. And you can use that. So you'll always use, it'll always change. So be sure to, when you are figuring out or when you are checking, you should always check on the day. And another point to bear in mind, and just to clarify, these values that are mentioned on the top in the chart, that's not how much you pay in zakat. Please remember that. We're not saying this is how much you're going to give in zakat. This is just the threshold you need to have, and zakat will be obligatory upon you. The amount that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam fixed of how much you need to give in zakat is 2.5% of your wealth. So once your zakat year comes by, once the lunar year, one lunar year after, whatever assets you have, you'll pay 2.5% on the entire amount. And inshallah, we'll discuss that in a bit more detail. Now, going into in more depth on what we touched on before, productive wealth, what wealth is zakat fardh on? Number one, any form of gold and silver, zakat will be obligatory upon that. Now, that can be in any form. If someone has gold and silver in the form of utensils, ornaments, jewelry, even in the form of bullions, like blocks of gold and silver, someone would just have those at home, zakat will be obligatory in any form. Now, to bear in mind, even if, and just to touch on this point, many women that have jewelry, they have it for personal use. They've obviously bought it or they've been gifted it, and it was for personal use. Bear in mind that jewelry, even if it's for personal use, that will be zakatable. Yeah, the jewelry in and of itself, gold and silver, sorry, not jewelry, gold, we're referring to specific gold and silver, in and of itself is a productive asset. So that will always be zakatable. Yeah, whether it's in the form of, whether it's for personal use, whether it's for business use, or whatever it may be, that will always be zakatable. Also, nowadays you have white gold, rose gold. These are also classed as gold. So you'll also count that into your zakat assets. Now, a point to note is there's different types of carats that you get. Now, do you have to pay zakat on all of them? To make this simple, any jewelry that you have, as long as the amount of gold or silver within that jewelry is 50% or more, you'd have to pay zakat on that. If it's below 50%, so the gold content in that jewelry or silver is less than 50%, which would mean that the other metals they would mix, for example, platinum or any other metal, copper, whatever else they mix into it, that's more than 50%, then that item will not be zakatable. And simply, if you look at the carats, 12 carats means that the gold and silver content is 50%. And then as the higher you go in the carat number, then that's more percentage of gold and silver. So 12 carats above, that's zakatable. If you have anything below that, for example, you have a 9 carat piece of jewelry, and the gold content, for example, or even the silver content is only 9 carats. In that case, you won't pay zakat on that. That will not be zakatable. So this is something that you can check. You can even, if you can't remember these figures, you can go to a jeweler and find out from them. But this is something that you would consider if you have gold or silver assets. Number 2, any types of money that you have, cash in the bank, banknotes, money that's lying around at home, you really need to calculate all of that. Even if you have foreign currency, you would actually exchange that, or you don't need to exchange it, but you can look at the exchange rate and figure out how much it would be in the country that you're living in, and you would add that to your assets as well. Number 3, if you have any business merchandise, that would also be calculated. Number 4, if you have income of properties, so if you have properties that are on rent, then the income of those properties, you'd add that also to your assets. Number 5, income derived from a hiring business. Now, if someone owns a business in which they don't, for example, have merchandise per se, they're not really selling anything, rather they're hiring out cars. Someone owns a car hire business, then they don't, the cars are not for sale. So you won't class that as the merchandise of the business. Instead, whatever wealth that they're earning from that business or from hiring those cars out, that will be added to the rest of the assets. They'll pay zakat on that wealth. Number 6, livestock. Again, we're not going to be focusing on that. Number 7, pensions. And number 8, stocks. If someone's investing in stocks, inshallah, those will be calculated as well, part of your assets, and we'll go more deeper into those, inshallah, later on in the course. So these are all the types of wealth that we're looking at. So if you have any of these or all of these, you'd be gathering those all together and adding the value of all those up. If you reach the Nisaab, then you of silver that we just mentioned previously, then zakat will be obligatory upon you. The types of wealth that zakat is not fardh on, what will we not be looking at? What will we not be counting? Zakat is not fardh on any metals apart from gold and silver. So there's many metals today that are very precious. They're actually sometimes very expensive, like platinum, even copper. These types of metals, there's no zakat on those. Bearing in mind all the points that I'm going to mention on this slide, these are assuming that these are like just personal items or the items that you have, you won't pay zakat on them. But as soon as any of these are part of business use, you're actually selling them, you trade in, for example, these types of metals. that's your business merchandise, then you will pay zakat on that. Please remember that point, that these the things on this list, if you are selling them, that's actually your business, then you will pay zakat on those, because zakat is obligatory in any business merchandise you have. But just generally, if you have these types of items, for personally you have them at home, you won't pay zakat on them. So any metals apart from gold and silver. Number two, there's no zakat on diamonds, pearls, and any other precious or semi-precious stones. So this is something that actually you can deduct from your zakatable assets. If you have jewelry at home, or someone has a ring and it's got some diamonds on it, you've got maybe a necklace or earrings that have sapphire, ruby, pearls, any of these types of precious stones, you won't pay zakat on those stones. So this is something you can go to a jeweler maybe and get them to weigh it for you and say, if you have a ring that's, for example, 20 grams of silver, but you also have a stone on top, which is another 5 grams, you can actually deduct that. You won't pay zakat on the full weight. You can go to a jeweler and they can minus that for you. Or if you know the weight yourself, you can kind of minus that. So you won't pay zakat on those. Now, just to mention, if someone does sell these, and nowadays, as many people have businesses of selling like these agate rings and these rings that have precious stones on them, you will pay zakat on those, because that's no business use. That's part of your business merchandise. Number three, there's no zakat on imitation jewelry. There's also no zakat on gold and silver plated items. These are not zakatable. Number four, there's no zakat on fixtures and fittings of a shop. Also, if you have vehicles that are for business use. So if someone has a shop and they have, some people ask that I've got, shelvings, I've got clothes racks, I've got stands, I've got all these types of things. They even, things to put their stock on. You don't need to count that towards your zakatable assets. We're only counting the actual merchandise you're selling. Also, if you have like a vehicle that you use for your business, that's your business car, or you have a business van, you've got a delivery van, you've got a truck or something of the sort, you won't pay zakat on that as well, because it's not something that you're selling. Number five, there's no zakat on any living quarters, household furniture, utensils, personal clothing, whether they're in use or not. Again, we touched upon this already before. Any personal items, whether you're actually using them or they may just be lying around, they may just be in storage, but they were personal items that you got, you will not add them to your zakatable assets. And number six, this is the point we'll discuss in more detail, but if someone does reach the Nisaab, now let's just say someone's added up all of their assets, they've got a mixture of assets, they've added them all up, and they actually reached the Nisaab, they're well past the Nisaab, but they owe someone else money, they have debts upon them. Now, we'll cover this later on, that when you do have debts, you can actually deduct those from your zakatable assets. Now, let's just say someone, for example, had £8,000 worth of all their assets, the value of all their assets was just say £8,000, but they were in debt of £10,000. Then they owed, for example, a friend £10,000. Now, although they've gone past the Nisaab of silver, the debt's so much that if they were to minus the debt from the wealth that they have, they would be left below the Nisaab. Then in that case, you also won't have to pay zakat. And we'll talk about that a bit more. So just to touch upon this point, the way zakat will work is you have your zakat assets, you'll calculate all your assets. So you can even make a sheet, you can make a spreadsheet, you can even write these down. You'll calculate all your assets, and then there are some things that you can deduct. The Sharia does allow you to deduct some things. If you have debts that are upon you, you can deduct those. And then whatever amount is left after that, so your net assets after that, then, or the assets after minusing the deductible liabilities that you can, then we'll look at that amount. And inshallah, we'll have an example that'll make that much more clear, inshallah. Now, once you've fulfilled all the conditions, you've counted all your assets, you fulfill all the 5 conditions we mentioned in the beginning, you've now identified that zakat is fardh on you. You now know, okay, I've got the silver Nisaab, I've fulfilled all the conditions that I mentioned, I need to pay my zakat, sorry. Now the question that comes is, when do you pay your zakat? When does a person need to discharge their zakat? The very important question, many people come, especially in the month of Ramadan, I've had a few people ask this as well, that, the month of Ramadan comes, and alhamdulillah, they've now made the intention, many years they've not paid their zakat, and they've realized, okay, you know what, I need to pay my zakat. I've been kind of dodging it, I never really understood it. Today's the day, or in this month of Ramadan, I want to pay my zakat. And they'll ask, for example, they come and ask myself that, I've got this much assets, how much do I need to pay in zakat? What you need to understand about zakat is you don't just pay zakat, for example, the day you calculate all your wealth and you now know and pass the Nisaab, you don't just pay zakat straight away. The way zakat works is you need to possess that wealth for one entire lunar year. So after 1 year, that is when you will pay your zakat. So to understand this in another perspective, everyone will have 2 points. You have a point A and you'll have a point B. Point A is, for example, when you realize that this is the first time you've gone past the Nisaab or you've reached the Nisaab, that's point A. When you fulfilled all the conditions, you became mature, you're baligh, for example, if someone was already wealthy, or you fulfilled all the conditions and you reached the Nisaab on a certain day, that's point A. That's when you fulfilled all the conditions. You won't give zakat on that day. One exact lunar year from then, so the exact date, but the next year Islamically, that is when you will pay the zakat, you pay your zakat, provided that on that day you have wealth that equals the Nisaab. Yeah, inshallah, bear with me. This can be a bit tricky, but we have a few graphs in the next slide that inshallah will make it much more easier. Now, just going back to the point of when a person first reaches the Nisaab, your zakat year starts when you first have your wealth and it reaches this Nisaab. That's when your zakat year will start. That's your point A. Now, every year after that, which we're now going to class as your zakat anniversary, 1 year after that is when you will actually discharge your zakat. Now, many people in today, especially those who haven't been paying it for the previous years, they will struggle with this, because you'll have to identify when you first became the owner of the Nisaab. Now, some people might need to go back quite a few years. You might need to go back all the way to maybe when you were 20, maybe 18, 19, to check, okay, this is when I actually got my first job. What's easy is now you do have your bank statements. You can check, your previous jobs. You can have a look into this. But ideally, the correct way is to figure out when you first became the owner of the Nisaab. So if you've not paid zakat for 4 or 5 years, but you've been working for 4 or 5 years, you need to go all the way back and figure out, okay, this is actually when I first got my first paycheck, maybe. Or even maybe you had money lying in your account, you've just saved up pocket money, you've saved up wealth here and there, and by the age of 18, 19, or even younger than that, you had reached the Nisaab already. You'll have to go back and check that. So this can take a bit of working out. However, if someone really can't do that, let's just say someone is struggling to actually find that date, they just, too many years have gone by, or they don't have, proper records of when they actually reach that, the Nisaab, then in that case, the scholars have said that you can choose a date at random. You can randomly, if you really can't find out what date it was you became Sahib on Nisaab, you can, pick a date at random, but then you'll need to stick to that date. And this is why you could say, many people do choose Ramadan. They've kind of picked Ramadan as their date, but do please understand that picking Ramadan as your date is not really the, just randomly everyone wants to pay in Ramadan. That's good, because obviously we understand that your reward is multiplied. But for everyone to have their zakat anniversary falling in Ramadan, that shows that something must be wrong. Either no one's really been calculating the zakat and they think it's only linked to Ramadan. Zakat in Ramadan, although a lot of people pay in Ramadan, there's no, real link there that you have to pay your zakat in Ramadan. Ideally, if you're to look at a large group of Muslims, their zakat year should be all year round. Everyone should have a different zakat year. It shouldn't all be in Ramadan. But if someone, again, can't figure out their zakat when they became Sahibul Nisaab, you can choose a random date, but you stick to that date. Now, once you've figured out what your starting point is, the date when you become Sahibul Nisaab, the owner of the Nisaab, 1 year from then is when you'll pay your zakat. During the year, if there's fluctuation in your wealth, because obviously your wealth is not just going to stay at one point for the whole year. In some months your wealth may increase, at some points it may decrease, but your wealth fluctuating throughout the year doesn't make a difference to whether you need to pay zakat or not. Yeah, that won't affect you at all. Rather, at the end of your year, on your zakat anniversary, if you have wealth on that date that's above the nisab, then you will pay 2.5% of your wealth on that date. And this should continue for you. Your zakat anniversary will continue. So every year, just to give you a bit more of a thorough example, let's just say on the 1st of Muharram, we're going according to the Islamic date. On the 1st of Muharram, I became Sahib al-Nisab. I won't pay zakat yet. On the following year, 1st of Muharram, that is my zakat anniversary. On that day, I will check, okay, how much money do I have today? On that day, if I have more than the zakat nisab, then I'll pay 2.5% of my wealth. And that will continue for every year. On that same date, the 1st of Muharram, that will be my zakat anniversary. Just as many people remember, their wedding anniversary and all these other dates, you really should have a zakat anniversary date, which you remember. That's like your date, and that will stay with you. Unless one of the two following things happen. One of the things that can happen is that on your zakat anniversary, you don't have wealth that reaches the nisab. Let's just say that after a year, you, for example, became bankrupt, or you spent all your money the day before, a few days before, and when it came to your zakat anniversary, you had less money than the nisab. In that case, you won't pay zakat that year, and you kind of restart the process. And you'll then see, okay, when do I reach the nisab once again? And then you start a year from then. The second option is, during the year, you lose wealth and you reach zero. Yeah, I mentioned that as if your wealth fluctuates throughout the year, that doesn't affect you at all. However, if your wealth goes to zero, you become like total, you have nothing. Or you have such a large debt that once you minus that from your assets, you become zero, you've got no wealth at all. Then in that case, again, your zakat anniversary, you will scrap that, you'll put that to a side and you'll start again. Now, I know some of you may not have fully understood this. Inshallah, the next slide, we've got some diagrams here. This will make things, inshallah, much more clearer. Now here, if you look at the top chart here, this top line graph, we're looking at Zayd zakat. And on the bottom, if you look horizontally, we have the Islamic months. So we've got Muharram, the graph starts at Muharram 1443, and then in between Muharram, after Muharram, there is Safar. So it's 1 month, Mesa month. Yeah, just so everyone understands that there's Muharram, then Safar, Rabiul Awal, and these are all the months. And we end at the following year Muharram. So this is actually present day, you could say. Yeah, the Muharram that just went by. Few months ago, many months ago, that was 1443, that was the year. And inshallah, the next Muharram that's coming, that's going to be Muharram, and the Islamic year will be, Hijri year will be 1444. And on the vertical side, we've got the amount of wealth, you could say in pounds, 200 pounds, 400 pounds, 600 pounds, etc. Now we're looking at Zayd's zakatable assets. We're looking at Zayd zakat here. Also a point to bear in mind is some people tend to go according to the solar calendar. So they use dates like the 1st of January, 2nd of January. It's not correct to go according to that date. Why? Because the Islamic calendar, the lunar calendar, is actually 10 days approximately shorter than the solar calendar. So if someone's paying their zakat according to the solar calendar, then what will happen is approximately, you could say 30 plus years after, you'd actually miss a full year of your zakat. So therefore, you have to go according to the Islamic calendar. So let's look at this graph. And Zayd on the, let's look at the date. I've got Muharram here, but we're going to make it specific to a date. So let's just say the 5th of Muharram, 1443, Zayd had 300 pounds. He looked at his assets, or let's just say he only had cash. He had 300 pounds. Now, let's assume that 300 pounds is the nisab of silver. I know I've said it's a bit more, especially in today's day and age, but let's just say, to make it a bit more easier, let's just say 300 pounds was the nisab on the 5th of Muharram. Zayd reached that nisab. He had 300 pounds in his bank. Now, Zayd has reached the nisab. Let's just say Zayd, he's Muslim. He's an adult. He's baligh, he's mature. He's also, sane. And he's got the nisab. He's got 300 pounds. So this is point A for Zayd. Zayd has now reached the nisab. Will Zayd pay zakat? on the 5th of Muharram 1443? No, he will not. Why? Because as I mentioned before, one of the conditions of the Nisaab is 1 year needs to go by. So now Zayd won't pay zakat right now. He will note this down. He'll note this in his diary, or he can put a reminder in his, on his calendar that look, 5th of Muharram, 1443, I became owner of the Nisaab. He'll set a reminder for the next year. On the 5th of Muharram 1444, this reminder will hopefully pop up and you'll see it. Now during the year, we can see that in Safar, Zayd's wealth starts to increase slightly. In Safar. Sorry, if you just give me one moment. I think someone's raising their hand, but I'll let the organizers, hopefully they can see, inshallah. But let's just we'll carry on. If you have any questions, please leave that till the end. If you have any questions, because many things may be answered throughout, and if I'm looking in the chat, then it might distract what's going on, and I might get slightly distracted. So we'll focus on this. So in Safar, we can see Zayd's assets likely start to increase. So in Safar, he's actually got £400. Rabiul Awwal, he's got 500, he's increasing. And there's also a debt. So when we come onto Rabiul Thani, he actually goes all the way down to £200. Now, as you can see, on that month, he's below the Nisaab. But as I mentioned in the previous slide, you fluctuating throughout that year does not matter. There's Zayd's wealth. As we can see, this line graph, he's fluctuating, he's going higher, he's going lower. One point, he's gone below the Nisaab. That doesn't affect him. He's got his start date, which is the 5th of Muharram, and he's going to now just simply wait for his end date, which is 5th of Muharram the following year. So now let's fast forward all the way up to 5th of Muharram 1444, right at the end of the graph. On this date, Zayd gets his reminder, or he remembers himself. On that date, what Zayd will do is he will say, okay, today is my Zakat anniversary. He will now count all of his assets again. Yeah, he'll look at all of his assets again. And here we can see Zayd has got more money than he did at the start of the year. On this date, 1 year after on his Zakat anniversary, he's actually got £500. What Zayd will do then is he will take 2.5% of that £500, and that he will use, and he'll pay that in Zakat. That's Zayd's Zakat done for that year. That's how simple it is. Zayd's Zakat now has been paid for that year. And obviously, once he's paid that, 2.5% is nothing of his wealth. It's not going to make him, become poor. From £500, 2.5% would be £12.50. So he's still got a significant amount of money. And on that day when he paid his Zakat, he's still above the Nisaab. Automatically, his next year will start. And then on that same time, so 5th of Muharram 1444 will now be a start date. He'll put a new reminder for the 5th of Muharram 1445. So like this, if Zayd keeps staying on top of the Nisaab on his Zakat anniversary, this will stay his year throughout the rest of his life. Yeah, this will stay the same. Every year he'll pay Zakat on that same date, or Islamic date. There will be no change to that. Unless one of the two things happen. Look at the graph below, and the graph below is the exact same as above. The only difference is Zayd again on the 5th of Muharram 1443, in the beginning, he again had £300, he had the Nisaab. So therefore Zayd's noted this date down. He's going to look 1 year from now. Now we fast forward all the way to 5th of Muharram 1444. On Zayd's Zakat anniversary, we look at, okay, he's going to look how much wealth do I have on this day. Now, unfortunately, Zayd, his wealth went all the way down. He only has £100 on his Zakat anniversary. Now, this is below the Nisaab. Let's just say on that day, again, he'll go onto, the well-wishers website, or he can ask his local jewelers. He'll say, okay, what's the Nisaab for today? And he checks the Nisaab and he realizes that, hang on a minute, my wealth is below the Nisaab. Simply, Zayd will not pay Zakat for that year. On his Zakat anniversary, because his wealth is below the Nisaab, Zayd won't be paying Zakat that year. And what also will happen is his Zakat anniversary will now he'll scrap that. And now he will then see again, when do I reach the Nisaab? So let's just say after maybe a month, in the month of Safar, 1444, Zayd reaches the Nisaab again on the 10th of Safar. He will begin this process again. He will note that date. On the 10th of Safar the following year, that will become his new anniversary date. And he will continue, and then he'll see on that day, okay, am I above the Nisaab? If so, he'll pay the zakat 2.5%, and that will continue to be his zakat year. That will continue to be a zakat anniversary. And again, if he falls below, he simply won't pay zakat that year, and he will then see again, okay, when do I reach the nisab once again? And then his year will start from fresh, like that. So these are the two options that you'll go through. A third option, and this is the option of where you go to zero. This is the scenario when you go to zero. So I mentioned before that your wealth fluctuating throughout the year doesn't make a difference to your zakat, whether you pay zakat or not. The only time it will affect whether you pay zakat is if you go to zero. So if we look here, Zayd again starts the year exactly the same. However, in Rabi'u Thani, we can see that Zayd went to zero. Now, how can someone go to zero? Either he's literally got no wealth, he spent every single penny he had, or Zayd had wealth, but he also had a large debt upon him. And when he deducted that debt from his assets, he just went to zero, or he went to minus. He was in debt. So in that case, what will happen is Zayd will again scrap his zakat anniversary. Yet usually if your wealth fluctuates throughout the year, as long as it doesn't go to zero, even if you went down to £1, you will not scrap your zakat year. You will still continue and wait for your zakat anniversary and check your wealth on that date. But here Zayd went to zero. He went to minus, he went to zero, or he went to minus. Therefore, Zayd will scrap his zakat year. The 5th of Muharram is no longer his zakat year. He'll start fresh. He'll start all over again. So then Zayd, let's just say in Jamadi al-Awwal or Jamadi al-Ula, his wealth went up and he had £400. Again, he's reached the Nisaab. So let's just give it a date. Let's just say it's the 10th of Jamadi al-Awwal. So here on that day, the 10th, that becomes his new start date. And he'll put a reminder, or he can note this down, that the following Islamic year, on the same date, the 10th of that month, he will check his assets. If it's above the Nisab, he'll pay zakat. If it's below the Nisab, he won't. So this is very simple. This is how it will be. So zakat is a year thing. Please remember that. You have a zakat anniversary. So you pay on your wealth at the end of that year. So it's not as simple as I want to pay today. I've not paid for so many years before. Can I just pay today? That's not how it works. It's this year frame is very important. Okay, so that, alhamdulillah, that should clarify a lot in terms of the 2 points. So point A is when you reach the Nisab, but point B, 1 year from then, is actually when you pay the zakat. Now, another important point, and this is in regards to when you're giving your zakat, you're actually giving it, is Tamlik. Tamlik means transfer of ownership, and this was mentioned in the beginning, the start definition of zakat, of what the definition of zakat entails is a transfer of ownership from a rich Muslim to a poor Muslim. Tamlik is necessary for your zakat to be done. There needs to be this transfer of ownership from yourself, the zakat payer, to the needy person, to the poor person who you're giving your zakat to. Now we'll look at the following conditions. These are very important. Number one, the transferor, as in yourself, must be the zakat payer or his or her agent. So either you're giving it or you have appointed someone on your behalf. So it could be a friend, it could be even an organization. If there's an organization that's collecting zakat funds and they have this whole system in place where they take zakat and they distribute it to the people that are entitled to take that wealth. You can make them your agent, you can give them your zakat, and they can pay on your behalf. The transferee, the person who's going to receive it, they have to be a natural living person who's entitled, who fulfill the criteria of being entitled to receive the zakat. You cannot give it to a legal entity. Now let's understand this for a moment. Legal entity meaning like a company, or for example, you have charities, you have businesses, you even may have institutes, you have Islamic schools. Many of these do collect zakat, but understand that by you giving your zakat to them, that's not you completing your zakat. Why? Because zakat is only complete when there's a transfer of ownership from the rich Muslim, the person who's paying the zakat, from him to the person who's supposed to receive it, the needy poor person. Only then will your zakat be done. When you're giving it to an organization or a legal entity, an Islamic school or a charity, they're not the ones that are legally, Islamically, the recipients of that zakat. You can't give them your zakat. They cannot be the end recipient of your zakat. By you giving it to them, your zakat is not fulfilled yet. If they need to then, once they give that money, once they'll basically become your agent. Once they use that wealth, or your representative, once they give that wealth to the poor person, that's when your zakat will be done. Yeah? To give another simpler example, if your friend is traveling to a country where there's poor people who, many of them are able to accept zakat, and you think, okay, let me give him my wealth and he'll give it to the poor people on my behalf. So by you giving your friend your wealth to pay the zakat when he travels abroad for you, when you give him your wealth, that's not your zakat completed yet. It's only completed once that the wealth has been a transfer of ownership to the poor person. Very important point to understand. Number two, the transfer must not be in remuneration or consideration for services. You cannot pay your zakat to someone as a payment or in lieu of some services. If you, for example, had a poor person who was working for you and you need to pay him wages and you think, wait, hang on, he's poor anyway, I need to pay him his wages, let me just give him zakat money as the wage. That's not allowed. Why? Because zakat money, it's a simple form of charity. It can't be exchange of anything. If you need to pay him wages, you need to pay him wages from other wealth. And the zakat is something that you give without anything attached, with no conditions attached, and not in exchange of anything. The only time it can be given in exchange of something is when we'll discuss is one of the recipients, al-abinin, are those who an Islamic government, for example, has appointed, like in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there would be individuals who were appointed to go and collect zakat. Now they would receive zakat, they would receive payment as a wage for that duty they had by the Islamic State from the zakat wealth. That was the only time. That's the only situation in the scenario where zakat money can be used to pay someone in consideration of something. Otherwise, that apart from that, when you're giving it to a poor person and you're giving it to the needy, it cannot be in exchange for something. The last point, the transferee must acquire possession and become owners of the funds unconditionally. When you're giving the poor person the wealth, you cannot set conditions. For example, some people would give a poor person wealth, maybe a relative of theirs, but they give it to them because they're owed money from that person. So they give them that wealth with the condition that we'll use this to pay me back. Or they make some sort of arrangements. I'll give you this money, but you need to use it for X, Y, and Z. You cannot do that. Your zakat will not be done. Zakat needs to be given unconditionally, where the person who's receiving it uses it as they wish for whatever they want. Also, a point to mention before we move on to the next slide, there needs to be this point of transfer of ownership. Now, to give you an example where that won't occur, if you have someone that owes you money, and this is a poor person, they owe you, for example, £1,000, and your zakat that year, let's just say it happened to be £1,000 as well. And you decide, okay, you know what, rather than me paying zakat of £1,000, I will just forgive this person's debt. This poor person, he owes me £1,000 anyway. I will just, it matches. I need to pay £1,000 to in zakat. This poor person who can receive zakat, he owes me £1,000. I'll just say to him, look, instead of me paying my zakat this year, I'll just forgive this person of that £1,000. Your zakat will not be done. Why? Because there's no transfer of ownership there. The wealth, that £1,000 that you are supposed to pay, you're not transferring ownership of that. So you physically, or you need to literally give ownership of that wealth to someone else. So what you could do is you could make that poor person, give that poor person that £1,000. Now, then it's up to them. Yeah, you can give it to them, you thinking that, okay, they need to pay me back £1,000, so hopefully they'll pay me. But if you give them that £1,000 and they don't pay you, that's up to them. They can do whatever they want with that money. You cannot even set the condition. Now, look, I'm giving you this £1,000, you need to pay me that back because I want to get my zakat done, but also I don't want to actually pay this because you owe me money as well. So you make some sort of condition that that's not allowed. What you'd have to do is you pay this poor person the £1,000, he does what he wants after that with him. If he's understanding and he knows, okay, you know what, I actually I owe this person who's giving me the money. I'd rather just give it back to him. That's up to him. But that's something that he has to decide for himself. Now, rules regarding zakat. Now, these are some important points. Zakat cannot be given or used for the construction of masjids, madrasas, hospitals, wells, bridges, or any other public amenity. This is important. We'll see that there's a lot of times people are collecting zakat funds, and they may be using it, or you may see that there's a collection for a masjid or a madrasa, and you think, okay, you know what? They're collecting money. It's for a good cause. It's going to help a lot of people. Let me give my zakat money to that cause. That you cannot do that. Your zakat will not be done. Why? Like you mentioned in the previous slide, you cannot, zakat there needs to be a transfer of ownership to the poor person. Here, you're not giving your zakat to a poor person. You're giving it to an organization, or you're giving it to someone to build something. Even if that hospital, just to bear in mind, even if someone is saying that we're building a hospital for poor people in a poor country, even then you can't give your zakat to that. Why? Because the poor people are not becoming owners of that wealth. Yes, someone's building a hospital. Yes, poor people are going to be able to use the hospital, but they're not becoming the owners of that wealth. So therefore, that also will not, if you were to give your money towards these causes, your zakat won't be done. Even wells. Now, with wells, this is something interesting. With wells, if you were to give money towards wells, now a lot of people collect money to build wells in other countries around the world, and they take zakat money for that. If someone was to take your zakat money, an organization, and they build 100 wells with that money, or 2 or 3 wells, regardless of the number, your zakat isn't done. Once again, why? Because the poor people are not becoming known. The poor people are not becoming owners of the well, unless, and one kind of just to kind of explain this in a different angle, unless that well is built and that well is given, the ownership of that well is given to that poor person. So you actually give money for an organization. What they do, and again, this is something that you may need to check. I don't know how these organizations actually, what their intentions are in terms of when they build it, what's the ownership like. But that's something the Sharia is quite strict in. So if you were to build a well, you pay for the well, and rather than giving your wealth to the poor person, you build this well and you give this well to the poor person. You say, look, this well is yours. You own this well. They can do whatever they want with that well. They can use it to get water. They can even sell it on if they want. That is one solution that would be allowed, because you're actually making them the owner of that. Point 2, poor students can also be given a bursary from zakat. If there's poor students who don't own the Nisaab, they can also be given the zakat wealth. Bearing in mind, if the poor student is mature, then you can give the wealth to them. If they're not mature, they're not baligh yet, then you would give it to their shar'i wakil, their legal guardian. Point 3, zakat can be paid from the same merchandise on which it is due. So you don't have to pay zakat in cash. You can pay zakat if you own a business and your business sells clothing, and you think that, okay, rather than me actually paying in cash, I'd rather just give that same amount but in clothing. Or if you have a food store, any type of business you have, you can pay from the merchandise of your business, and that may be easier for some people. That's also allowed. But bear in mind, it must be something that the poor people can use. If your business is something that's, that the poor people can't even use, then there will be a problem there. That wouldn't be correct. Because the whole point is so the poor people can use that wealth. But giving wealth would be something better. Giving wealth, why? Because then they can use that for what they want. Giving them that option and that scope for the people to use it for their own needs, that would be better. So giving something that's more, usable by them, it's got more use for them, as in giving wealth, that would be better. But again, the choice is yours. And then just a small example here. If someone had to pay £100 in zakat, and let's look at 2 scenarios, and just to kind of make this point a bit more clearer, someone had to pay £100 in zakat, and let's say 2 people here. One person, what he does is he uses the £100 and he feeds 50 people. He calls 50 people to his house and he hosts them. And this £100, he uses it, he makes food, and he just gives them a da'wat and he calls them over and he feeds them. Whereas let's just say person 2, he uses the £100 and he makes 50 ready meals. So he's got meals that are ready and he distributes it to the poor people. In the first scenario, that person's zakat won't be done. And the second scenario, it will be. Why? In the first scenario, he didn't make them the owner of that wealth. That food, he didn't make them the owner. When you call someone to your house and when you give someone dawah, you're not literally saying to them, this food is yours. You call them over, they eat from your food, they're eating from the food that you're providing them, and then they leave. So in that first scenario, because the transfer of ownership is not found, that person's zakat will not be done. Whereas the second person, because he's making the food, and again, you can give zakat in different forms, he's actually giving his zakat in the form of food to these poor people. They take this and they can do what they want. They can either eat it themselves, they can sell it on, they can give it to someone else. That second person's zakat will be done. Point 4, authority can be delegated to another person or organization for the distribution of zakat in order that it be utilized in accordance with the laws of zakat. So you can appoint someone else. So you can give your wealth to a charity, you can give it to an organization, and they can be like the middleman. They can be your representative, your agent, and they will then give the zakat to the poor and needy people. And this is something that you need to do your own checks for. That you should check yourself, that is this charity trustworthy? Is this organization trustworthy? As you don't want them to take your zakat wealth and then use it for something that it shouldn't be used for. Next point, if a person requests someone to give a certain amount on his behalf as zakat, then that is fine, your zakat will be done. Now, let's just say you have someone who's traveled already abroad, and you say to them, you weren't able to give them money then, but you say to them, look, can you pay zakat X amount on my behalf, and then I'll pay you afterwards? That's fine. Your zakat, once they pay the poor people, your zakat will be done, and you just have that debt upon you to pay that person back. The last point, if an agent is given zakat for distribution and they don't distribute it properly, then the burden and the obligation of zakat will still be upon you. Now, this is a point which, unfortunately, in today's day and age, we have many places and many organizations that are taking zakat money, but it's your job to check. It's your job to do a thorough check to see that, okay, is this organization or is this charity actually spending the zakat money where it's supposed to go? If you don't do your checks and you just simply, the first charity that comes to your emails that's collecting zakat, you just give it to them. And Allahu A'lam if they've used that properly or not. You don't even know how they're distributing the zakat. You don't even know what avenues they're using that wealth. Then that's something that you'll need to deal with afterwards. That's your zakat not being done. Yeah, you should do your thorough checks, inquire properly. Ask around, ask some friends. Okay, what places do you know that are trustworthy, that distribute zakat properly, and give it to those organizations and charities. Now, to whom can zakat be given? Now, just being cautious of time, we'll stop in the next 5 minutes for that break, inshallah. So hopefully we'll finish this slide and the next, and then we can stop for the break, inshallah. To whom can zakat be given? So the people that you can give zakat to, the Quran mentions 8 types of people. Number 1 is the fuqara. These are people who do own wealth. They have enough for their basic needs, but they don't possess wealth that equals the Nisaab. So this type of person you can actually find, many people say that we can't find poor people in our local, country or local cities to give to. But this first category, there are many that are like this, that they do have wealth, they do have food on their table, they might have personal items, they might have clothing, they might even have, work, but they're always living paycheck to paycheck. They don't have enough wealth that reaches the Nisaab. They're always, for example, in debt. You can give such a person the zakat, but you obviously need to do your checks properly. Masakin, these are those people that are destitute, extremely needy. They're forced to beg for their food. So these people you can give zakat. The poor people. Al-amilin, these are those who are appointed by an Islamic country head of state, Islamic government, to go around and collect zakat. They're actually paid zakat as a wage. Yeah, this is the only type that's paid zakat as a wage. Mu'allafatul qulub. These are those people who have recently accepted Islam and they're in need of basic needs. So by you giving them your zakat, it kind of gives them that encouragement, it gives them that assistance. It helps strengthen them in faith to get a bit more help. You're allowed to give zakat to them. Al-riqab, this category won't exist in today's day and age. But in the previous times, sometimes a slave would make an agreement with their master that, look, I will pay off my value let's agree on an amount. I'll pay that off. Once I pay that off, I'll be free. And the master would agree. So in that scenario, that slave, you're allowed to give that slave your zakat as well. Al-gharimin, number 6. These are those people who have a debt upon them. So they may well have wealth. They may even be wealthy, but because they have such a large debt upon them, the debt covers all the assets that they own. So they're more in debt. They're in such a debt that they can't come out of that debt. They can't pay themselves out. So essentially, they don't have the Nisaab at all. They're in minus or below that. You can give these people the zakat as well. Fi sabilillah, those that are completing an obligation in the path of Allah. The scholars have mentioned specifically those who are fighting in the path of Allah. You can give them your zakat as well. They don't have wealth enough for themselves. You can give them zakat. Ibn Sabil is a person who may be wealthy at home. So he might have been rich in his home country, but he's traveling. And due to travel, he doesn't have any wealth on him to such an extent that he can't travel back home. So that person, you can give him wealth, zakat wealth, so that he can fulfill his travel needs and get back home. Now, bear in mind that all of these categories, apart from the third one, al-amilin, those who are appointed by the Islamic head of state to collect zakat, and the zakat is given as a wage to them. Apart from that category, the rest of the categories, you cannot give them zakat if they own the Nisaab. Why? Because then they will need to pay zakat themselves. So if they've got wealth below the Nisaab, then you can give them zakat. Who can you not give zakat to? So those are the people, previously were the people you can give zakat. Who can you not give zakat to? So zakat cannot be given to the Banu Hashim. What we refer to as the Sayyids. You cannot give zakat to them. Number 2, you cannot give zakat to your ascendants or descendants. This is like your parents, your grandparents, also your children and grandchildren. You cannot give them zakat. Why? Because you should be taking care of them yourself. You shouldn't be giving them zakat. You should be taking care of their needs yourself. Zakat can be given to. You can give zakat to other relatives. So, for example, if you have a brother or sister, they don't have wealth, they may be poor, they don't have the Nisaab. You've got nephews, you've got nieces, you've got uncles, you've got aunties, you've got other relatives. You can give them zakat, as long as they don't possess the Nisaab. Also, one point previously in the bab that I just missed out was a husband and wife cannot give zakat to each other. You can't give zakat to each other. Point number 4. Zakat cannot be given to institutions or organizations who do not give the rightful recipients zakat. Rather, they use it for construction, investments, or salaries. And this is very important. See, if masajid, etc., are doing construction work and they're normally asking for donations, you're not allowed to give your zakat towards that. Even if you were to ask them and clarify them, they should not be taking zakat for those causes. Why? Because it's not being used for poor people. It's not being given to the poor people. So any place, even if it's for a great Islamic cause, they're building a masjid, they're doing further constructions, they need it to pay wages maybe for the teachers, you cannot give zakat to that. You can give normal sadaqah to that, but you cannot give zakat. Zakat cannot be given to non-Muslim. Non-Muslim, you have to give your zakat to a Muslim. You can give non-Muslims nafil sadaqah, you can't give them zakat. The next point, if a person can't tell if someone's needy or not, then it's best to make sure. That's your responsibility. Now, again, it's sometimes asking might be a bit rude. Sometimes ask if, especially a family member, you want to give them zakat, or even sometimes a person you might not know, but by asking them, they will feel offended. Then obviously in that case, it's probably best to give it to someone else. If you're not sure about someone, you're not 100% if they are allowed to take zakat or not. You can't tell. Again, the categories we mentioned in the previous slide, and they don't have the Nisaab, you can give them zakat. So if you're not sure, make sure, do your checks. If you really want to give it to someone, like you have a brother or a sister that really needs it, but you're not sure, then feel free to ask them. But obviously that depends. But again, if you really want to give it to them, then it's best to check. If you don't do your checks, then that's on you. If they turn out that they weren't allowed to give zakat, then that's on you. But if you did your checks, inshallah, then and you did as much as you could, you even asked them, and they said, look, I don't have any wealth, etc., then that should be fine, inshallah. You can give them your zakat. Zakat will not be fulfilled by purchasing books for an institution or land purchased for public utility and made waqf. Again, this the same rule I'm reiterating it multiple times, because unfortunately people do this. You can't give, if you buy books and give it to a madrasa or a masjid, and look, please take these, and these are for the masjid, but you paid with your zakat money, that's not allowed. Yeah, why? Because again, a poor person is not being made the owner of that wealth. Zakat cannot be used for the kafan of a deceased because they cannot become the owner. If someone's passed away and you think, okay, I've got zakat money, I've not paid my zakat yet, I've got this money lying around at home, I might as well use it because this family they don't have a kafan for this person, let me just pay for the kafan. You cannot use the zakat money for that. What you could do is, if the family is poor, you can give the poor people, make them the owner of that money, and then they can utilize it as they wish. They can go buy the kafan. But you just buying the kafan, and that's not your zakat won't be done. A deceased person's debt cannot be paid from zakat as well. Yeah, you can't. If someone's passed away and you think, okay, I've got zakat money lying around, let me just use that to pay his wealth, to pay his debt off. That won't be allowed. Yeah, your zakat will not be done. So what we'll do, inshallah, we'll just take a short break now. If that's okay with Mona Junaid Sahib, we will stop now, and we will come back in 5 minutes. We'll give it a, let's see, what's the time right now? Yeah, if everyone could come back in about Melissa, what do you think?
Yeah, that's fine. That's completely fine, inshallah. So we'll come back in around, say, 4:18, inshallah.
That's perfect. Yeah, 4:18.
And inshallah, around 4:45 or so, I'll open the chat option for you to ask your questions. So do take a note of your questions, and you can ask Sheikh, inshallah, towards the end of the session. We've closed the chat option now because you can distract Sheikh while she's going over the presentation. Okay, so do come back after the break. We Ustad will cover many important topics like zakat on pensions, business stock, and much more. So do please come back in a few minutes, inshallah.
4:18 we'll start, inshallah. Jazakallah.
As you've seen the message I put on the chat option, so we do have many other upcoming courses very soon, inshallah. Do check them out on our Instagram page, which is www.instagram.com, Khayr Academy, without any capital letters. We post all our upcoming courses there. If you have any courses, any recommendations you have that you want us to run, do email info@khayracademy.com. That's info@khayracademy.com. If you have many participants or many brothers and sisters who request the same course, we will try our best to accommodate and cater for you, inshallah. We have many trainings and workshops and courses that we have provided in the past 2 years. Do watch that on our YouTube channel. So we've provided some trainings for teachers. We have a training on how to teach qaida from the very beginning, how to teach students alif bata all the way until they can recite fluently. We also have a training on how to take a student from qaida to juz amma. We have a training on how to teach someone hifz, how to run a hifz course, how to teach students with SEND, special education needs and disabilities. We also have a training on how to lead Taraweeh without many mistakes. We have many courses that we have provided in the past 2 years. We have a Tajweed course. The full course is on our YouTube channel. We have a Seerah course, the Meccan period of our Prophet's life from the age of when he was born until the age of 53. We have a course on the 40 hadith of Imam Nawawi. We have a course for sisters on the 4 great women of Islam. We have a tafsir course for everyone. It's the commentary and translation of the last 10 surahs of the Quran of Juz Amma from Surah Fil to Surah Fatiha. We also have a Ramadan crash course as well, a short course, 2 videos on how we can benefit and make the most of Ramadan. That's something you can check out. We also had a Ramadan conference last week on Sunday, where we had many reputable scholars, international speakers, nasheed artists, reciters from all over the world. They tuned in. The full workshop, the full conference is about 6 hours. You can watch that. It's the last video we uploaded. To help us carry on providing free courses and workshops for everyone, for the full Muslim Ummah, you can financially help us on the link I have attached on the chat option and make dua for us. Allah allows us to continue providing free courses, free workshops, and helps us provide for the Muslim Ummah. Brothers and sisters, we will carry on in a few minutes, so do stay tuned, do stay with us, inshallah. Any questions you have, do make a note of it and keep on the side. When the option is open, inshallah, we will take questions. I'll just hand it over to Sheikh, inshallah.
Jazakallah, Sheikh. Should we restart?
Yes, inshallah, we can.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I'm just cautious on time. Sorry. So inshallah, just so we can finish on time and have as many questions. So Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Okay. So now we will be covering the topic of zakat on debts. Do we need to pay zakat if we have given someone else our money to borrow? Someone owes us wealth. Do we need to pay zakat on that or not? Do we count that part of our assets or not? So debts and these other assets can be divided into 3 categories. We've got debts that are owed to oneself, money that people owe you. We've got debts that are payable to others, that wealth that you owe people. And we have number 3, other assets, for example, home purchase schemes and pensions, etc. Now, starting off with any wealth that's owed to you. Now, if someone owes you wealth, we split that into 3 categories. We have bad debts, we have strong debts, and then we have weak debts. Each one of these has their own ruling. Bad debts are those debts that, unfortunately, you have no realistic hope of recovering it. The person that you've given that wealth to has, full on denied that they owe you that wealth. Unfortunately, this happens sometimes. That person just either it may be for a genuine reason they don't remember giving it to you, or some people, unfortunately, just they don't have any intention of paying you back, and therefore they just say to you that, look, I don't owe you this money, and therefore you've lost all hope. In such a case, that wealth that you've lent to that person, you do not need to add that to your zakatable assets. So while you're making a list of your assets, these debts don't need to be added onto that. If in the future, let's just say many years down the line, that person does come back and he feels sorry, he feels bad, and he's like, I don't want. He realizes that, okay, this person, I actually owed this person, or they just feel like paying that you off just so that they don't fall into any sin, and they do end up giving you that wealth in the future. You do not need to pay zakat in the previous years. You won't pay zakat in the previous years. Rather, when you got that wealth, you'll add that to the rest of your assets. And then on your next zakat anniversary, you'll just deduct 2.5% of that wealth. Strong debts, they need to be added to your zakat assets even before you receive them. And the ruling of weak debts is you will only add it to your assets after you receive them. So we'll go into more detail here, inshallah. So strong debts, the ruling of a strong debt is even before you receive that debt, you've given this debt to someone, you've loaned this money to someone, even before you receive that wealth back, you need to add that to your zakat calculation. You'll add that to your zakat assets, even before you receive it. Now, what's best to do is you add it to your assets and you give zakat on that yearly. So for example, you've loaned someone £10,000, a friend, and when you're calculating your zakat on your zakat anniversary, you have £5,000. What's best to do is you take that £10,000, or you've not received it yet, but you will when you're doing a zakat calculation, you add that on as if it's you have it, and you add it to your assets, and then you give 2.5% of that. Even though you don't have it, you still need to add it onto your zakat every year. Now, what's the strong debt? A strong debt is money that you're waiting to receive from either personal loans. So you've given friends, family, or anyone else a personal loan, you've loaned them money. That's a strong debt. You will need to add that onto your zakat assets even before you receive it. Also, number 2 is any trade debts. So if you have a business, someone's purchased goods from you and they still owe you money, and they're still to pay you. They may pay you in a year or 2 years, or however long it may be. That's also classed as a strong debt. So you will still need to add that money to the rest of your assets, even though you've not received it yet. Now, bearing in mind, obviously, there is an aspect here where you may have loaned quite a lot of money out and you don't have enough money yourself. So on your zakat year, although you're adding that money on to your rest of your assets, when you're going to discharge zakat, you don't really have enough money. So what you can do in that scenario is, if you wish, then you can wait till that money's paid back to you and then discharge zakat of all the previous years. Yeah, but the key thing to remember is on strong debts, you're assuming, essentially, or you're counting that wealth as if you already have that. Although you don't, that's how you look at that wealth. So if you decide that, okay, you know what, he's going to pay me in 5 years, he's going to pay that person, that friend or that business debt, they're going to pay you in 5 years' time. You do need to pay zakat all of those years, but if you think, okay, I don't have enough money, actually, I'll wait till I receive that money. What you would do in that scenario is every year you'll calculate the zakat on that wealth, and then you pay zakat. Once you receive it, you'll pay those 5 years zakat in one go. But you do have to pay zakat on that. Weak debts, you would only include a weak debt as opposite to strong debt. You'd only include that into your assets after you receive it. And for all the duration you didn't receive it, let's just say you received that wealth after 4 or 5 years, for those years that you hadn't received that wealth back, or you hadn't received that wealth at all, you will not need to pay zakat on those. Yeah, whereas in strong debt you do. Now, what comes under a weak debt? We've got wages. So if you worked for someone and they owed you wealth, they've not paid you that wealth for a year or 2 years, they kept delaying it, you do not need to add that to your zakat assets. Yeah, although it's money that ideally belongs to you, it's your wealth, but you do not need to add that to your zakat assets. You will only pay zakat on that when you receive it. So when you do receive that wealth, then you'd add it to the rest of your assets, and on your zakat anniversary, you take 2.5% of all your wealth. Next point, dowry owed to a woman, a wife. So if there's a woman who is owed her dowry, she's not been paid her mahar yet, and let's just say it's been a few years, and the husband, he has intention of paying it, he's going to pay it, but it's just been a delayed process, he's not paid it right away. In that case, the wife does not need to add that to her zakat assets. Even if it's been 10 years, she doesn't need to add it on. Once she receives that money, then she'll add that onto her assets, and on the zakat anniversary, she will take 2.5% of that, and she doesn't need to pay for the previous years. Pensions, their class is a weak debt. We'll come on to that, inshallah. There's a bit more detail into pensions. Unpaid rental for landlord. Yeah, if you're a landlord, you own properties and you rent them out, and you've not received the rent yet, you do not need to add that to your zakat assets. Only once you receive it, then you add it on. Outstanding bequest payment, inheritance. Now, this last point, just to understand this, when someone passes away, we have this concept of the wasiyah, bequest, where a person, before they pass away, they can write in their will that they want to give a portion of their wealth. They're allowed to give up to 1/3, but that's after the paying of the funeral rites and after paying of debts. They can allocate 1/3 of their wealth to someone who's not already inheriting. So, for example, let's just say I got a bequest from my friend. My friend passed away, but in his will, he wanted to give me £1,000 of his wealth. Now, I'm still waiting on that. I'm not an inheritor, but I'm someone that's been, he's made a wasiyah from me. So I'm waiting for that. The family is maybe sorting out, arranging all the necessary things. And, as long as I'm waiting for that, I've not received it yet, I don't need to pay zakat on that. Once I do receive that, then I'll again add that to my assets and then pay on my zakat anniversary. Now, bad debts, just to go into this a bit more, if the person that you've given this wealth to, he acknowledges that they owe you money, yeah, the debtor, the borrower, he acknowledges that he owes you money or she owes you money, regardless of their financial situation, you still will then class that part of your zakat assets. Yeah, please understand that just because they can't pay you right now, but they still acknowledge the debts there, then you cannot exclude that. Yeah, the second point, that's the only time where you will not include the part of your assets, when they actually deny it. When they deny they owe you anything, there's literally no hope of you getting it. Why? Because they're not even acknowledging the debt. Then you don't pay zakat on that. You would not add that to your zakat. In the previous scenario, as long as they accept, they know, okay, you know, they're accepting that they owe you money, they acknowledge it, but they're, you know, they might not be paying you right now. Then that's part based on what type of wealth that is. If it's just a normal debt to friends and family or trade debt, then again that would be strong. That'd be a strong debt, and you'd add that onto your zakat assets and pay yearly. So now we go into the second category of debts, and this is debts payable to others. Here we come onto the point where these are things you can deduct from your zakat assets. Like I mentioned before, the kind of formula of working out your zakat is you calculate all your zakat assets. You would add up all, you know, the assets you have, cash, gold, silver, etc. You'd add these all up, and you'll deduct debts that you owe to people, or there's these deductible liabilities that you can kind of minus from your zakat assets. And that's kind of made an ease for you. And what can you deduct? So number one, you can deduct outstanding basic living expenses. Now, these, please bear in mind, it's not for future expenses. It's the ones that are due upon you that have not been paid yet. For example, you have utility bill, gas bills, council tax, phone bills. So you have, let's just say on your zakat anniversary, you're due to pay your zakat, you've calculated all your assets, but these are due upon you as well. You can deduct these from your total assets. Once again, not future ones. You can't just deduct the full next year. It's only the ones that are a debt upon you now. Goods purchased on credit. If you've purchased things and you've not paid back that debt yet, so ideally it's a debt that's upon you, you can deduct that as well. Outstanding salaries and payable service fees. If you have a business, you have a shop, for example, and you need to pay salaries, you also have some service fees you need to pay for, you can deduct that also. Again, it's not, you know, we're not looking at future. You can't just now cut off all your future years. It's the ones that are due upon you. Unpaid dowry to one's wife. If someone still owes their wife their dowry, now, I know we talked about it previously as the weekday. This is from the women's perspective. So for women, this previously was the women's perspective, that they are still owed their mahr from their husband. They don't need to add that onto their assets. Here is that from the husband's perspective. So he needs to pay the dowry. Now, if he is he's intending to pay that dowry, and you know he's striving to pay for it, then he can deduct that as well. You know, it can't be the case where, let's just say he's got £2,000 or £3,000, he had a high dowry amount, and he's just not bothered of paying it, and he's deducting it every year from his zakat. That's him kind of abusing that that kind of leeway that's been given. So that's not correct. If he's actually engaging to pay for it, and he's trying to save up to pay for it, then he can obviously deduct that amount. Because the whole point of, remember, the whole point of deducting these amounts is the Sharia has made it easy upon us, because it understands that we've got debts to pay, we've got money that we borrowed, we need to pay those back. So you're deducting this from your zakat assets so that you can pay these back, not just so you can have less zakat to pay, and you're not even intending to pay these dowry and debt, etc. Then we come on to short-term loans. So these are loans that you may have borrowed from someone, and you're trying to pay it back in that same Islamic year or as soon as possible. You know, just someone's loaned you money and they've not deferred it. They've just said, okay, pay me back as soon as possible, and you're striving to pay that back. You can deduct those debts off your zakat assets as well. Then we come into the final point of deferred long-term loans. Now, these are loans that, you know, have been structured over a long period. It could be many years. For example, like a halal mortgage. Now, you're not paying that off in one go. You may have borrowed 60,000, 70,000 pounds, and you're paying that off, you know, over 20, 30 years, for example. In that scenario, you can't deduct the full debt that I've got £70,000 debt on me. I need to deduct all of it. I want to deduct all of it. No, that's not allowed. What you can do is you can deduct the following year's payments. So on your Zakat anniversary, when you've calculated all your assets, and then you look, okay, for the next 12 months, how much am I going to need to pay towards my mortgage? Let's just say it's £400 a month, and then times that by 12. You can deduct that amount from your Zakat assets. Now, a note at the bottom: if someone has a conventional interest-based mortgage or loan. Now, we're not discussing halal haram of this. This is not the point right now to discuss that. But if someone has taken one of those out, they also, again, because it's a long-term loan or a deferred loan, they also can deduct 1 year's worth of payments. However, very important to understand that when you do have this type of mortgage or loan, you're not simply paying back the capital, you're also paying back interest on top. So for example, there's just a random figure. If you're paying £500 a month, you could say like £400 of that would be the actual money you borrowed, and £100 is interest. So when you're deducting the following 12 months worth of payments you need to make, you can only deduct from your zakatable assets the capital amount. You can't deduct the interest amount. So you need to look at your own agreement if you have taken something like this out, or whoever has done something like this. They need to look at their own agreement and look at the paperwork. And the 12, what they would do is whatever amount they're paying monthly, times that by 12, minus all the interest from that, and then they'll have left the capital payments that they're making, and they can deduct that from their zakat assets, and therefore pay zakat on the rest, not the amount they deducted. Now moving on to pensions. Pensions, this is something that many people miss out in their zakat, so it's very important to count this in. And just to cover this briefly, there's two types of, you could say there's two types, split pension into kind of two categories. You have the final salary pension schemes, also known as defined benefit pension. These are pensions which a person will receive after retirement. So this is like one of the common ones that you get. You after you retire, you'll get this amount, the money that's been saved up in that pension. There's no zakat on that pension. Yeah, throughout the years, you don't need to pay zakat on that pension. Only once you receive it. So once you retire, you receive that amount of money. Let's just say it's 30, 40, 50,000 pounds. Once you receive that money, then you'll add that to the rest of your assets, and then on your zakat anniversary, you'll pay zakat on that. Before you receive it, all those years, you don't need to pay zakat on that. Then we have a second type of pension, like money purchase or defined contribution. And also have personal pension schemes. Again, this is something that you would check yourself. Ideally, if you have a pension and it's a final salary pension, or it's something related to your work, you can ask your work. If it's something that you've opted in for and it's like a personal pension scheme, then you should have the details for that. But you need to check yourself. And these types of pensions, you have more of an involvement. You have more of an interest. You have more of an involvement of what's happening in that pension. Now, in this case, the zakat is due on these types of pensions. The second type of pension, zakat is due upon these. And however, you're not going to pay zakat on the entire money that's in that pension. Let's just say you've got £20,000 in that pension. It's a defined contribution or it's a personal pension scheme. You're not going to pay zakat on that £20,000 that's inside that pension scheme. Rather, you're only going to pay zakat on the zakatable assets of that pension. Yeah, you're going to pay zakat on the zakatable assets of that pension. Now, just looking at the next slide, just to give you an example of this, just to explain this in a bit more detail. A pension fund, when we talk about a pension's a fund. Yeah, we call it a pension fund, and the money that's in there is being invested into you could say shares, into companies. So ideally, if you're to look into the details of your pension fund will have a fact sheet, and that fact sheet will tell you, it will give you all of the shares, or sorry, all of the stocks, all the stocks or all the companies that your money is being invested into. Now, when you're paying zakat, especially when we look at the business section that's coming, you don't pay zakat on everything within a business. You've already touched upon a few points before. You won't pay zakat, for example, on the fittings, the fixtures of a business. So essentially, when a pension is made up of stocks, those stocks are basically companies. You're not going to pay zakat on the entire value of that. Yeah, rather, you're only going to pay, every company will have their zakatable assets. For example, they'll have cash, the cash the company owns, any products that are finished, any unfinished products, any raw material. These are some things that are zakatable. Some things that are not zakatable are like, for example, the buildings they use, if they have cars for their business, if they have, fixtures, fittings, any machinery, these are not zakatable. So when you have a pension, especially of the secondary types, money purchase, and a personal pension scheme, you do need to pay zakat on that, but you're only paying zakat on the zakatable assets of the pension, not the rest. Now, how to figure that out? Now, to be honest, many people will struggle to figure this out. Those who can, they need to. Those who can't, alhamdulillah, the ulama have made like a proxy value that you can just use this value and make it easy for you. Those who want to check, who want to go into a bit more detail and actually find out, you can inshallah, if you have access to it, you can. What you'd essentially do is you'd look up your pension. Again, you can ask your workplace, or if you've enrolled yourself into one, you would find your pension. You can look online and you can find the fact sheet of your pension. The fact sheet will mention all the stocks that fund is investing money into. Once you find all those, all those stocks, in other words, you could say all those companies, you would look into, you could look into the financial statements of those businesses, and they will actually say to you, you'd be able to see the breakdown of all the assets of that company. Now, I know many people listening to me right now will be getting confused on, okay, it sounds very confusing. Some people will struggle to do this. And in that case, if you're not able to, the ulama, specifically Mufti Faraz Adam, alhamdulillah, he's made it much easier. He's done an extensive research. And what he's done is he's looked at, some of the main, types of pension funds, and he's given like a proxy value. So you can simply use this percentage, and this will make things much easier. So 5 types of pension funds, you can say the common ones are the ones that usually you would get. You've got the Sharia fund, you've got a direct property fund, you've got equity funds, you've got mixed asset funds, and you've got the last one, which is bonds, gifts, mixed interest funds. So what you would do is you would, first of all, find out what kind of fund, what kind of type of fund is your pension. That you can, again, ask your workplace, check, maybe it may have been, if you go into the details, you can just Google it as well if you know the name of your pension fund. Through that, you'll find out, okay, is it a Sharia fund? Is your pension a direct property? And once you find that out, you can use this chart, so you can note this chart down, and this will give you the proxy of the zakatable assets of that fund. So it kind of has done a lot of the work for you. Now, you may be paying more, but again, that if you may be paying more as zakat, but if you really want to pay the exact amount, then you kind of have to check yourself, and that can be a bit tricky. But you can check, like how I mentioned before, by going through the fact sheet, going through the financial statements, etc. Now let's look at the example of Aqil, and hopefully this will kind of tie this all in and make it very simple. Aqil has an equity pension fund. He looked up his pension fund, and it was an equity pension fund, for which the proxy, the zakatable assets proxy, is 27%. And Aqil's pension, it's got £40,000 in that pension. Now, Aqil, like I mentioned before, he's not going to pay zakat on that £40,000. He's not going to do 2.5% of that £40,000. Why? Because not all of it is zakatable. What he will do instead is, the proxy that he's got, or the ulama have determined, is 27%. So he would first find out 27% of £40,000. That will give him the zakatable liability, the zakat liability, and that equals to £10,800. Then he will give zakat on this £10,800. So 2.5% of that is £270, and that's what he will pay. So this has made it much more easier. And just to quickly go through that one more time, if you have a pension, simply find out the type of pension you have. Once you've found out the type of pension, it will be most likely one of these. If not, you can go to, for example, NZF, National Zakat Fund, their website, foundation, sorry, their website, and there they have like calculators that can help you, figure this out. But simply, if you're to go find what type of pension you have, once you've found what type it is, you will take the percentage of the zakatable assets proxy that's there. You would work that out from the money that's in that pension. Like if you've got £10,000, if you've got £20,000, you would find the zakatable assets, the percentage. You will figure that out of the wealth that's in your pension. Then the answer that you get from that, you work at 2.5%. And that's how much you will give in zakat. Yeah, and this is for the second type of pension. If someone wants to read a bit more in there, it can be a bit more, you can find a bit more detail. Mufti Faraz Adam, alhamdulillah, he's got this leaflet, you could say, that goes in much more detail. So if you want to read into that, do a bit more research into that, then you can. If you want to ask some local scholars, you can, for a bit more further help, maybe if you're not able to do this yourself. Now, some common transactions, just to give you the ruling of zakat on them, you have deposits. So if you've paid money as a deposit for like safekeeping, then that's still zakatable. Yeah, that's still zakatable. Down payments, if you've given a down payment for something that you're purchasing, then most likely, normally down payments, you don't get those back. So if you're not going to receive that back, and that money has been given as a down payment, then that's not zakatable. If you have insurance premiums, again, we're not going into halal, haram, health insurance, obviously, we're not going into those, but if someone has got something like these, health insurance, car insurance, etc., you do not need to pay zakat on that. They're not zakatable. Benefits, you get many benefits from the government, working tax credit, child credit, any types of these benefits, you will also pay zakat on those. So again, you'll add that to your zakatable assets, and then on your zakat anniversary, you'll pay zakat on those as a whole. Now, zakat on business stock, a very important slide we have here. For those who have businesses, what do you need to pay zakat on? Now, zakat is compulsory on any items you purchase with the intention of resale. Now, if you look at that point that I just mentioned, even someone who has a small business from home, they've just started it recently, they've purchased a few items with the intention of selling them, that classes as business stock. You do not need to have a full-on shop. You do not need to have a full-on store. Anything that you've purchased with the intention of resale, your maqsad was to sell that, that becomes business stock. You would need to pay zakat on the value of that 2.5%. You would basically add that to the rest of your assets. Now, another point to bear in mind is many times we have extra stuff lying at home that we bought for ourselves, they're for personal use, but we just intend to sell it. You have a lot of apps nowadays that you can sell old clothes. For example, let's look at, there's an app called Vinted. Let's just say someone had 20 old t-shirts that were, they don't fit them anymore, and they wanted to sell them. So they went on an app like Vinted and they put them all on for £5 each. So that total is £100 if they have 20 t-shirts. Now, because those t-shirts were never purchased for sale, they didn't purchase it to sell them, they were for personal use, you won't pay zakat, you won't class that as business stock. Once you've sold those t-shirts, the wealth that you get from that will be zakatable. You'll add that to the rest of your assets. So just by merely making that intention for those items that were personal use, they won't just become business stock. Yeah, please remember that. Only if you buy something, if you were to buy something new, for example, or buy something and the starting intention of that was for resale, that becomes business stock. Now let's look at this table here. What's zakatable in a business? Not everything is zakatable. You have money, any money that's in that business. So that's cash in the bank, cash in the business, cash in the till, even money lying around. That's zakatable. If you have finished goods, you would value those at the sale price. So if you're a wholesaler, then all your finished goods, the wholesale price of those, or if you're a retail store, then the retail price of all your finished goods, that's also zakatable. If you have unfinished goods, they will be valued at the cost price. So just give you a small example. If someone has a bakery, a small, cupcake business from their house. And what they'll calculate is any money they have in their business account, they'll count that, or any money that's lying around that's part of their business. Any finished goods, so if they have cakes that have been made, they're finished, they're ready products, they will also value those at their sale price. So if it's retail, they'll value at the retail price, and if they wholesale these cakes, they'll value at the wholesale price. And if they have unfinished goods, for example, they have flour, they have eggs that are not really used yet, they're just the ingredients, they still have those, they'll value those at the cost price that they bought those for. And once calculating all of that, that will be the assets that they're going to pay their zakat on. What's not zakatable in a business, so these things you don't need to count, is the buildings, the shops. If you have a shop, the actual shop itself, you don't need to count that. That's not zakatable. Any fixtures or fittings, shelves, clothes racks, anything like that. Any machinery that you're using. So if you have a cake business, if you have any mixers, you have any ovens, you don't have to pay zakat on those. Any vehicles that you use for the business, you don't need to pay zakat on those as well. So here you have the zakatable assets and the non-zakatable assets. And just to link this, see when we were talking about the pension and it got a bit confusing, this is what we were referring to. Many of those stocks that your pension is invested in, they will have, their values will have zakatable assets and non-zakatable assets. But we've discussed that, so you can use the proxy for that if that's difficult. Now, if you've purchased items for your business, you will always value them at the selling price, not the buying price. Why? Because then some people can buy something for as cheap as, for example, you buy something for £1, but you're selling it for £10. But when it comes to giving a zakat, oh no, I want to value it at the buy price. I buy it for £1, so I want to count it as £1. That's not correct. Yeah, you're selling these things, the current value of those or the selling value is £10, or the retail, the wholesale value will go according to that, not how much you bought them for. And at the end of all this, all the zakatable assets in your business, you will add that up with the rest of your assets and pay zakat on that. Bear in mind, your zakat, if someone has a business, the business isn't like an entity on its own. It's the person who owns it. So you might have gold, silver, cash, you have your own items that you need to pay zakat on, and your business is a part of that. So you add that all into one big sum and you pay zakat on that together. So it's not like your business is separate. But yeah, if someone wants to kind of just pay from their business separately, just to help with all the bookkeeping, etc., and they can do that. But ideally, it's the person who owns all of that. They're paying zakat. Now, zakat on shares. Inshallah, we've got a few slides left, and then we'll definitely leave some time for questions, inshallah. Even if we go slightly over, I'm okay with that, hopefully. If Mojnid, inshallah, once I finish, he can let me know. But zakat on shares. Now, nowadays especially, there's many people that are investing. There's so many apps that you can use to invest in companies. You can buy shares and sell shares. What's the ruling on zakat on that? Now, the person buying shares, they're going to be buying it for one of two intentions. Either they're purchasing those shares to sell, and that's majority of the people. Majority of people are buying shares in companies. Why? So that when the value goes up, they'll sell them. In that case, the shares themselves have become, you could say, like business merchandise. They become an article of trade. You're literally buying those to sell them. Therefore, you will need to pay zakat on the full value of those shares. So if you bought those shares for £5 each, and on your zakat anniversary, you will look at those shares and you'll say, okay, the shares have gone up double. Now they're £10 a share. And let's just say you have 10 shares. So you bought 10 shares, £5 each. So that's £50 in total. But now on your zakat anniversary, you opened up your investment, your portfolio app, or whatever it may be, and you realize, okay, all my shares have doubled. So now it's actually, instead of being £50 for the 10 shares, you're sitting at £100. You will need to add that to your zakatable assets, and you will pay zakat on that as well. The other intention someone would buy that for, their shares for, or invest, is they're doing it long term. So they're not really buying those to sell. Although in the back of their mind, they might think, okay, you know what, if I get a really good price, I might sell it in the future. But their main intention to buy them was to get dividends. So, they're not really focused on selling them. They're playing the long game, you could say. In that scenario, you would need to pay zakat on, number one, all the dividends you receive. You'd pay zakat on that. You'd add that onto your assets and pay zakat. But also, you still need to pay zakat on the shares themselves, on the zakatable assets of the business. To make this simpler, let's look at the next slide. Let's look at this chart. Now, the example here, let's look at Dawood. Dawood's purchased some shares of a firm called Plum, a random company. I don't know if something exists, but if there is, I'll just made this up. So Dawood's purchased shares of this company called Plum for £100. He's got £100 worth of shares of Plum. And he didn't buy those shares. There's two, let's look at both scenarios. If Dawood bought those shares with the intention of selling them, that I'm just waiting for this to boost up, and when the price goes high, I'm going to sell them. Then Dawood have to pay zakat on the full amount, the full value of those shares on his zakat anniversary. So if on his zakat anniversary it was still £100, but it went to £200, he would pay zakat on that. If, however, our example here is mainly looking at the second example, Dawood bought these shares, but for long term. He doesn't want to sell them. He wants to get dividends from them. Now, this £100 worth of shares that he has, he will need to pay zakat on that, but only the zakatable asset, only the zakatable assets of Plum he would need to pay. What that means is he would look at the company that's invested in, and he would look at the company's assets. Yeah, this again you can find on the financial statement, the balance sheet. You could find this, that this company, what its total value, what is it split into? You know, what are the assets of that company? So if you look at this pie graph, this is the pie graph of all the assets of the company Plum. Now from here we can see it's got 10% raw material, it's got cash 10%, 10% of the company's value is produced goods, 10% is goods that are mid-production, and 60% is machinery, land, furniture, vehicles of the business, etc. Now from here, based on what we've discussed in the previous slides, you yourselves would be able to now answer this, is what are the zakatable assets? Now, raw materials, that's zakatable, cash is zakatable, produced goods, that's zakatable, yeah, that's like business merchandise, and mid-production goods, that's all zakatable. So 40% of Plum's assets are zakatable. You would pay zakat on those. The 60%, you don't pay zakat on those. You don't pay zakat on furniture, land, machinery, buildings, vehicles. You don't pay zakat on that. So what Dawood will do here is he looks at the company, he looks at all the assets of the company. He's figured out that, okay, 40% is zakatable. So what Dawood will do is he will find out 40% of the shares, what his shares are worth. So his shares are worth £100. Yeah, as I mentioned above, his shares are worth £100. He will now figure out 40% of this. So 40% of 100 is 40 pounds. Yeah, 40% of 100 is 40. So 40 pounds. He will pay zakat not on the full 100 pounds. He will pay zakat only on 40 pounds. So 2.5% of 40 is £1. Yeah, he will pay £1 in zakat. Now, again, here, many people are going to be confused on how do we figure this out. Many people won't be able to figure this out, especially if you've invested in like a fund that has so many companies under it. To do this for each company can be very hard. And therefore, again, Mufti Faraz Adam, and some scholars have mentioned different amounts. Mufti Faraz Adam, he's mentioned a proxy on shares of 25%. So what he mentions is that if you, again, we're only talking about the second thing, yeah? I'm going to go back just to explain this. If anyone has bought shares with the intention of resale, this is going to be majority of people, because majority of people buy them to just wait for the price to increase and sell them. You will pay zakat on the full value of your shares. But if someone has in the second one where they're just waiting for dividends and they're not planning to, they didn't buy the shares to sell, then according to the proxy that, for example, Mufti Faraz Adam has meant 25%, what you will do is you will look at the total value of your share of your shares of the stock that you invested in. You look at the total value. You would use the proxy of 25%. So you'd find 25% of what your shares are worth, and then whatever answer you get, you will pay zakat on that. So you pay 2.5% on that. Yeah. So I hope that's a bit more clearer. And so that's how that would work. Now, we're on the last, inshallah, last two slides, and then inshallah we'll finish and we can go do our questions. Now, the intention very important point in zakat is the intention. You need to have the intention of giving zakat when you're giving it to the poor person, or when you're giving it to your agent, or at the time of separating the zakat funds from one's total assets. So there's 3 points here. The key thing here is you need to have intention. When you're giving your zakat yourself to the poor person who's entitled to receive zakat, either you can make intention then, or when you're giving your wealth to your representative, your agent, you're giving it to the charity, you're giving it to a friend who's going to distribute it for you, you can make your intention then that this is for zakat. Or when you have all your wealth and you're taking your zakat out from there, you're separating your zakat funds from the rest of your assets, your 2.5%, you're taking this out. If you make intention then, that's fine as well. You might want to pay it later on, or you might want to pay it bit by bit, but that's also fine. But the main thing is you need to have your intention. If someone's paid wealth, some people have had a question like this before, where, a few months ago I paid, a couple of hundred in charity. And later on they realized, a few weeks down the line, they thought, okay, hang on, I needed to pay my zakat. I'll just make intention now. You can't do that. You have to make intention either at the time of giving it yourself, or when you're giving it to your agent to give it on your behalf, or when you're separating that zakat money from the rest of your assets. The scholars have mentioned, though, that if you have given someone money right now, like you've handed someone money and you just realize, hang on, I should have just made the intention of zakat. If they still have that wealth, they've not used it, they still have it with them, you can make intention and that should be okay. But anything past that, then you can't. And that's just gone, that's sadaqah or whatever you gave it as, and you need to give zakat from start. A side masla from this is paying on behalf of your spouse and children. Now, again, when we're talking about children, we're not talking about non-mature, because they don't have to pay zakat, they don't fulfill the criteria. But if you have children that are old enough, the zakat's obligatory upon them, or you have a spouse, you have a wife, or a wife, if, for example, the wife wants to pay for the husband, and they say, look, we'll pay for your zakat, for example, you need to have their approval and they need to acknowledge it as well. Why? Because whoever zakat is obligatory upon, they're the ones that need to make the intention of paying the zakat. So if the husband just pays zakat for everyone and nobody knows, and many years down the line he goes, I actually paid zakat for you, and they don't even know, they've not even made intention, they have no clue at all, then that wouldn't work. Yeah, you need to actually, if the husband wants to pay, that's fine, but you just clarify with them, say, look, I'm going to pay this on your behalf, and if they say, yeah, that's fine, and then you can pay, go ahead and pay for it. Now, a note here at the bottom is haram income. A lot of people ask, some people may have had haram income in the past, or they've, now they've kind of, changed their ways and they don't know what to do. You do not pay zakat on haram income. The ruling of haram income is you need to give that in charity. You don't do it with the intention of, I'm going to get sadaqah reward for this. No, you're doing it to get rid of this wealth from you, and you simply give it to charity, you give it to poor people, and that's you getting rid of that wealth. There's no zakat on that. Finally, we're going to end with this example. We have an example here of just someone who's calculating, Zaid, who's calculating his zakat. On the 14th of Rabi al-Awwal, 1443, Zaid had £5,000 in his bank. And we're assuming this is when Zaid, let's just say Zaid hit the Nisaab then. This is Zaid's point A. So again, we're going to look at 1 year from then. Now, a few months down the line in the month of Rajab, Zaid hit a low and he only had £300 to his name. So he went all the way from 5,000 to 300. And we're assuming that the Nisaab is 350 in this example. So Zaid's fallen below the Nisaab. As I mentioned to you before, fluctuation throughout the year doesn't matter as long as you don't go to zero. So Zaid's he's still going to wait till the next year, 14th of Rabi al-Awwal. By the 14th of Rajab now, a few months down the line, by the 14th of Rajab, I wrote 1443 here. It should be 1444, should be 1443. Sorry, just ignore that. It should be the same year. So 1443. Zaid's financial situation had improved, and now he has £200 in hand and £4,000 in his bank. He also has money owed to him by Ahmed. Ahmed owes him £80. Umar owes him £100. And Zaid, he owes someone else. He owes Adam £250. Also, Zaid has a gold ornament at home, which is valued at £1,000. Zaid also has a business in which the goods on his zakat anniversary is worth 7,000. So we're going to calculate all the wealth Zaid has. Zaid's got 200. You can make this diagram for yourself, this chart. Zaid's got £200 in cash. He's got £4,000 in the bank. He is owed £180. This is money that's owed to him. And again, this is a strong debt. It's a personal loan he's given. So he will count this even if he's not received it. £180. He's got £1,000 gold, value in gold. And he's got £7,000 worth of trade stock. Now, adding all that up, he'll add all that up, and deductibles, he can deduct, he owed Adam £240. So because he has a debt on him, he can deduct that. So he can deduct £240. So once he adds up all of his assets and he minuses the £240 debt, he's left with a total of £12,140. This is him calculating this on his zakat anniversary. He adds his assets, he makes a list of his deductibles, he minuses deductibles from his assets, and he looks at, okay, what's the total I have now? He has 12,140. Now, this is well over the zakat Nisaab of silver. So therefore, he has to pay zakat. He takes 2.5% of this amount of 12,140, which is £303.50. So Zaid will give that much in zakat. His zakat that's due upon him is £303.50. So Zaid will pay that, and that's his zakat done for that year. Once he's paid that amount, he's still above the Nisaab. So again, he will put a reminder for the following year, and he will follow this process for the rest, unless one of the previous things happened that we mentioned. Either he doesn't reach the Nisaab on his anniversary, or he went to zero, and then we mentioned that previously. So alhamdulillah, that's the end of the course. Jazakallah khairan for attending. I really appreciate everyone who's attended. I hope everything has become much more clearer. And I'll open up to the question and answers. And Sheikh Junaid, you can, if there's anything else you want to mention. Will I just open up the chat, I believe?
Yes, I've opened the chat option for everyone, inshallah. The recording will be sent onto our WhatsApp group, the temporary group. We'll close the group by tomorrow, inshallah. For those who are not part of our WhatsApp group, you can visit our YouTube channel, which is Khayr Academy. Khayr spelled as Khayr. We should upload this recording of this workshop by tomorrow evening, inshallah. If anyone has any questions, you can ask Sheikh now. If you think of something later on, you can email us on info@khayracademy.com, and we can ask Sheikh and reply back to you. We have a question, Sheikh. Video.
Yeah, I'm just having a look. Okay, so we have a question from a sister. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Wa alaikum assalam. An individual was unable to pay zakat for a number of years until 6 months ago. He received £20,000. He was not aware of the rules of zakat and paid zakat at the start of this Ramadan. Will this be accepted as sadaqah or zakat? So they were unable to pay zakat for a number of years until 6 months ago and received £20,000. Okay. Just to kind of understand that, when you mean that they were unable to pay zakat for a number of years, are you saying that they didn't, the zakat wasn't further on them? Is that what you are mentioning, that they didn't, the zakat wasn't further on them until 6 months ago? Or are you saying that they had wealth, the zakat was further on them, but they just didn't pay for it? They didn't have enough money to pay that off. Now, he was not aware of the rules of zakat and paid zakat at the start of Ramadan. So if they paid at the start of Ramadan, I'm not sure, that's quite vague. Again, if they paid with the intention of paying for zakat, then it depends. Will this be accepted as sadaqah or zakat? That question is quite vague. If, for example, you're saying that zakat wasn't obligatory upon them, and it was 6 months ago they realized, okay, zakat's farad on me. And then they paid, you can pay zakat in advance. Yeah, this might help. You can pay zakat in advance, and many people they do that in Ramadan. So they might need to pay zakat in 6 months after Ramadan, but they pay in Ramadan with the intention that this is my zakat. That's perfectly fine. The only thing you need to do is on your zakat anniversary, when you're actually supposed to pay it, what you would do is you would calculate your assets and figure out your zakat on that day. Now, if what you paid in Ramadan is equal to that amount, then alhamdulillah, you've already paid in Ramadan in advance. If, however, you overpaid, then the extra amount will just be sadaqah. If you underpaid, then on your zakat anniversary, figure out how much you underpaid, and you can just pay that afterwards as well. That's fine. If you put some clarification, then hopefully that will make it a bit more easier. Yes, he had a lot of debt which he paid, and due to sorry, I'm just struggling with the chat here. I'm just going to make this a bit more bigger. Okay, so
I think that what he's meaning is, I think that's linked to the second part of the question, which is,
okay.
My father passed away last year from COVID.
Okay, apologies. Okay, so you mentioned, okay, so may Allah grant them Jannatul Firdaus, may Allah make it easy for you. But back to your question, also my father passed away last year from COVID, and my mother received his death and service from his employers. This is now her only source of income. Does she pay zakat on this 12 months from when received? Yes. So the wealth that she has, if she already had wealth that equal to the Nisaab, so if your mother already had wealth that equal to the Nisaab, she would already have her zakat year. She would just add this wealth onto that. So just to answer another point, very important, if you get separate amounts of money throughout the year, they don't all have their zakat years. Not every lump of money has its own 1 year. So if she already had money that's past the Nisab, then her year would have already started. Once she gets this, for example, £20,000, she'll simply add it to the rest of her assets. But if she wasn't past the Nisab, and now by receiving this wealth, she is now past the Nisab, yes, then 1 year will start. So in 12 months from then, exactly 12 months from the Islamic date, after that 12 months, on that day, she'll look at the wealth she has left. So if she still has that wealth, or however much she has, if it's past the Nisab, then she will pay 2.5% on that. Alhamdulillah. Assalamu alaikum. Again, this is from another sister, I believe. What if you haven't used the lunar calendar? What can you do to correct this? What you can do is, if you're using an English date, according to the English calendar, you can go online and convert it to an Islamic date. So you can go back, if you know the English date from when you started, you can kind of convert that to the Islamic date and go according to that. And hopefully should be fine, because the Islamic date is 10 years less than the English calendar. You'd only be affected after about 30 to something years. What will happen is the Islamic year, one extra year would have passed according to the Islamic calendar, but you've missed out on that because you've gone to the English one. So as long as it's not been that long, it's maybe only been 4, 5, 6 years, just convert your English year into an Islamic calendar, and then you'll just start following that from now on, the lunar calendar. So try to go back when you first start calculating your zakat. Assalamu alaikum. Jazakallah khair for this informative session. Ameen wa iyak. I really struggle to calculate my zakat. Is there anyone or anywhere I can go to help to calculate my zakat? Jazakallah for that. That's a very good point. So many people struggle to calculate their zakat. What you can do is you can go on a website, NZF, National Zakat, I believe it's foundation or fund. I think it's National Zakat Foundation. They actually have an online calculator that you can put in. It'll ask you questions. You can fill that in, and once you fill that in, it'll calculate your zakat for you. There's also a few other websites. There's Islamic Finance Guru, I believe. They also have a calculator, so you can use that as well. You just need to input information, and that will kind of give you how much zakat you need to pay. So you can use those. You can also ask, if you have any local scholars, they can also help. I'm not sure of Khayr Academy. You can maybe email them, and they can maybe pass down to me. And you can maybe see if that's fine.
That's fine. If you have any questions, in-depth questions, you can email that to us. That will allow Sheikh some time to email back, and we can forward that back on to you. That's info@khayracademy.com, inshallah.
Okay, another question from a sister. If you took out a loan and due to financial circumstances, that loan is put on hold and you're not paying towards it, would you still use that in your zakat calculations? So if it's like a long-term loan, but you're not paying towards that loan, if you look at a loan, okay. So if you're essentially saying it's like a long-term loan, but if it's a long-term loan but it's deferred, you're not paying for it at the moment, in that case, I wouldn't deduct anything. Yeah. For example, if you've borrowed, you've had to borrow, if someone's borrowed £20,000 and they're not paying towards that, they've been given 5 years that you don't need to pay anything, then I wouldn't think it would be correct to deduct that, because the whole point of deducting from your zakat assets is if you need that wealth to pay. But if you're not using that to pay, if you're making the intention to pay and you want to pay up earlier and you want to save up to pay towards it, then maybe in that scenario, but if you're just totally not paying, they've given you that period of you don't need to pay anything to us, then in that case, then in that case, I wouldn't deduct that. But if you still wanted to deduct it, then you can maybe pay in advance every year. If you have a yearly amount that you're paying this towards that loan because you want to get, your intention is I want to reduce this for myself and I want to pay off advance, then you could just pay that off even before your zakat anniversary, and you won't count that on your zakat date. But generally, I wouldn't say to deduct that. Another question from a sister. Assalam. Walaikum assalam. If you didn't pay zakat on gold from year 2000 to 2009, how do you calculate how much the actual amount you need to pay, as rates on internet are not clear? It is $54 of 22 karat gold. Can you please help with the calculation? So I would say to email that. Essentially, that's a long period from 2000 to 2009. You would essentially need to go back into 2000, and you would essentially need to go back. Again, if you've gone past the Nisaab, you can easily find calculators or online calculators that go back. So you could even, for example, NZF National Zakat Foundation website, you can actually go back and check what the Zakat Nisaab was in 2000, for example. So you can actually go all the way back. So you can check, okay, what the value of the Nisaab was on that date. You can also check what the value of the gold was on that date. Yeah, you can do that. And then based on that, you can kind of work your way forward year by year. So you can use that website, NZF's website. And then, but if you need some help, then you could send an email in. But then you'd have to be a bit more clear if you had any other assets as well. So yeah. No problem at all. Yeah, alhamdulillah. I'm glad that it's been answered. If anything's unclear, then feel free to ask in a bit more detail. Assalamu alaikum. Wa alaikum salam. A question from Brother Abdul Rahman. If someone gives children's private school fees monthly before giving their zakat, would they deduct the remainder left of the fees that is due until end of academic year? So just to kind of read that again, if someone gives, okay, so if someone gives their children's private school fees monthly, okay, before their zakat, before giving their zakat, would they deduct the remainder left of the fees? So if it's a monthly payment that you're giving, if you need to pay, if you're paying, so what you would do is if that payment is so it's essentially like a debt upon you that you're paying. So if you have any outstanding payments, you can deduct that. So if you're giving it monthly and your zakat anniversary comes, then you can pay that. Alternatively, if it's a yearly payment, what you can do is you can pay before. I'm just trying to understand here. Sorry, let me just read that one more time. Okay. So if you're giving it before you pay your zakat, I'm just confusing the part. So see if you're paying for it already before you're paying your zakat, then that means you've paid for it already. There will be nothing to deduct. But if your zakat anniversary has come, I'm assuming this would be the case. So it's your zakat anniversary, but your monthly fees, it's like a monthly fee that you're paying. Then whatever's outstanding on that day, so if you've not paid for that month, you can deduct that. And you could deduct that, especially if it's a deferred one. Yeah, but if you're paying monthly, then deduct what's outstanding, not what would be future. Yep. Again, it depends. If it's something though, if the fees are such where you can pay as soon as you can, then you can. If it's pay as soon as possible, but you're just spreading it out for your own ease, then in that case, if it's within that Islamic year, you could deduct that as well. Yeah, you can do that as well. Also with utility bills that you give monthly. Okay, same person, sorry, continuing the question. Also with utility bills that you give monthly, would that be considered as future bills and not deducted? Utility bills, if it's so you'd base it on your Zakat anniversary. If the due date of the bill is monthly and you're paying after, then obviously you won't deduct that. But only if it's outstanding, especially for these bills. If you have rent bills, phone bills, phone rent bills, you've got your gas, electricity. So those payments that are outstanding. So if, for example, you didn't pay for the full year, and on your Zakat day, you've actually got the year, you've got payments that you still need to pay for in the past, you can deduct all of those, but not future ones. You can't deduct future payments, only outstanding payments. So there's a question here from a sister. Would you be able to share the PowerPoint presentation with us? That again, I believe Nisaab can answer that best. I believe they may share it.
Yes. Our recording and presentation will be sent out, inshallah. It will be sent out.
A question from another sister. My sister have been paying Zakat only to find that she don't qualify, but has savings and gold, and she has a personal loan and student loan. Does she still pay? I mean, if she doesn't qualify for Zakat, but she's been paying it, and that would just be Sadaqah. Yes, that would just be Sadaqah. Now, when it comes to if she has savings and gold, then again, then that depends. Does she qualify? Does she not? So if she doesn't qualify, she's paid, then that's just gone now. That's Sadaqah. You can't now say that will be for my future Zakat if I need it in the future. No. That's kind of just Sadaqah, inshallah, Allah will reward you for that. If she does have gold and savings that make her reach the Nisaab and a year has passed, then she can deduct personal loans. When it comes to student loans, to be fair, see, student loans, they deduct that from your wage once you, as far as I'm aware, once you get, with a lot of these student loans is once you start earning a certain amount, they deduct that from your wage anyway. So deducting that, I don't feel that would be correct. Yeah, especially because you don't really need to pay that. They're not asking you for that. They're not chasing you for that. Only once you start earning a certain amount. And there might be cases, I mean, so many people don't even have to pay for it because they're never earning that amount anyway. So by you deducting that from your Zakat amount, it wouldn't make sense. Okay. Okay, so that's the questions finished so far. Jazakallah khairan for all the questions. If you have any more, again, like Mawlana Nisaab has mentioned, you can email them, and then inshallah, when we get time, we can answer those. Mawlana, I'll let you.
Yes, inshallah. So if you have any more questions that haven't been answered, or you have any lengthy questions, do email us at info@khayracademy.com. We will ask Sheikh and we'll get back to you as soon as possible, inshallah. If your questions have been answered throughout, or do check our workshop. If it's answered throughout the workshop, then do not send, please, we request you not to send that email, as we will have a lot of emails already that have been coming in. I want to say Jazakallah khairan to Sheikh for the informative workshop, and I hope it was beneficial for everyone. Keep us and Sheikh in your du'as. We have attached a message on the bottom. Please write a review on how you found this workshop. This will help us grow. It's on Trustpilot, reviews at khayracademy.com. Like I've mentioned, we've been running many courses, workshops, and trainings for the past few years. Do watch our recordings on our YouTube channel. And if you want to help us financially, to help us in providing many more free workshops in the future, then do help us on our Just Giving page at Khayr Academy. We'll leave it till then, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.